Welcome, everybody, to Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis. I'm Eve Sturgis. I'm your host. We are a podcast that is looking to talk to people who have had DNA discoveries, have had their lives turned upside down, so often by direct-to-consumer mail-in DNA kits that are so popular right now. It can happen other ways, too. It can come with phone calls and emails and papers that are found and, deathbed confessions. But either way, connection is happening faster and faster because of technology. Lives are getting turned upside down, and I want to talk about it. I am very excited today because I am here with TJ Raphael, journalist. She's a journalist with Sony's podcast division. And I'm excited because I have been chasing her politely and professionally, persistently, since like January or February when I first saw a promo for her project called Biohacked. And I emailed her right away and was like, you got to come on my show. And she's very busy, so I've just been bugging her, and I finally kind of like nailed her down right now. So I'm super excited because also, totally coincidentally, although maybe the universe was planning this, the last few episodes have really been like donor conceived focused, even though I also, of course, like I discuss NPEs, non-paternal events, and I discuss late discovery adoptions, and or any other, variable within our world. But lately it's been a lot of donor conceived. Like season 4 has inadvertently become this like donor conceived theme very often. So it's perfect that we're in the last few episodes of the season, and I finally wrangled you in to talk about this awesome project, beautifully produced podcast. So it's called Biohacked. It is about the industry, the science, the money. It's about all the things behind, she can tell us, and the politics behind the donor conceived industry. So let's just jump right in. Welcome. I'm so excited you're here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm sorry it took so long to get here. We had a real mad dash leading up to the launch of the show, and it was like, hey, you've got 3 months to produce 12 mini documentaries and then 6 bonus episodes that are all highly reported. And I was like, when do I sleep? Yeah. So thanks for bearing with me and letting me come on a little bit later.
Oh, of course. And I hope you didn't think that I was complaining. I was not complaining that it took a couple months. It's totally understandable. I just feel glad that we finally made it happen. Why don't you tell me, or why don't we let our listeners know kind of off the bat, are you donor conceived?
No, so I'm not donor conceived. The way that I came to this story is actually a little over 5 years ago now. So my friend from college, Amber, she and I hadn't seen each other in almost a decade. Like we were in the same journalism classes. We kind of had a couple friends in common, but we weren't super close. And I had been living outside of New York City for a while, and then I moved back. I grew up in the New York metro area, and I had bumped into her, and I was like, "Hey, we should like hang out. Let's like grab a coffee, grab a drink." And she was like, "Sure." And then like a few weeks later, she had texted me and was like, "Oh, my husband and I are going to the beach. Would you want to come?" And, for anyone that lives in New York, somebody with a car, you're like, "Yes, I will ride in your car to the beach," because otherwise it could take over an hour in the subway. And it was a little awkward because like Amber and I weren't super close friends, but we were friendly. And I remember we were floating in the water, and, we hadn't seen each other in a really long time. So we were kind of catching up on each other's lives. And she was like, "Yeah, so this crazy story, like I just found out through a commercial DNA kit that like my dad's not my dad, and like my dad's an anonymous sperm donor." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And like, this is 2017, 23andMe, I think in 2016 had only sold like 1 million kits. So was relatively new at that point. And me being a nosy journalist, I was like, can I record you? Can you like tell me the story? And that's what she did. And that's kind of how it started.
That's amazing. At that time, how long had the discovery been real for her before she was floating with you in the water?
Yeah, she'd only known for about 2.5 months at that point.
Okay, so like fresh.
Real fresh. Yeah, she hadn't tracked down her bio dad, as she calls him, at that point. She didn't know who he was. She had kind of come to this discovery, I think it was mid-May of 2017, when she had confronted her parents about her discovery through 23andMe. And then I think we were at the beach in July, so it could have been even less than 2 months, like 6 weeks later. And it seemed like a mystery to me. And I was like, this is an incredible story. I spent a lot of my career focused on covering reproduction, more so as it relates to, reproductive justice and access to reproductive health care, like abortion, birth control, things like that. And I thought that this was a really interesting way to do another story about reproduction that hadn't, I felt at that time, really been covered. But it, took 5 years to make. So I'm glad it finally saw the light of day. I had gone to multiple, I used to work in public radio at WNYC. I pitched it there, kind of got a no there. Then I went to Slate Magazine and was working on their podcast network, pitched it there, got a no as well. I pitched it during my job interview at Sony, which was actually my 3-year anniversary with Sony Podcasts is August 12th. So pitched it again. Then, Sony had other projects in the works that they wanted me to work on. And so like every year I had kind of repitched it until finally last July, I got finally the green light in the show. The first episode dropped in March. So it's been a long, many years labor of love to tell this story, which Amber's is one of many in the series that we tell.
Yeah. So just, I'm just curious as a podcaster and a journalist, and I mean, I'm not a journalist. So I'm just curious, when you say that you pitched it, during these 5 years, you were still working on it, like collecting all this. Mm-hmm. You were still, so even though you didn't have like a green light from anybody, you were like, I know that I'm onto something and I've discovered this, and yes, I'm going to keep like recording and making all this content, and eventually I will find a home for it. But just because you got a no didn't mean that you weren't continuing the work the whole time. So the 5 years is really. And how did you get from floating on the water with Amber and finding out that, DNA consumer tests, straight to consumer tests, were revealing all this information to people? How did you get from there to all the way to like, oh, this is an industry, and this is a political thing, and this is a really big deal? How did you get from there to there? Is it just because you're a journalist? Do you like Google everything? Like,
yeah. So as I started interviewing Amber about her story and just talking to her generally about what was going on, I felt also that I had to fact check kind of what she was telling me. And so, I asked her, oh, have you tried to track down your biological father? She's like, he's not on 23andMe. I found a cousin, but they won't talk to me. I've kind of hit a wall. And I said, well, why don't you just go to the clinic where, you were conceived? And she's like, well, the clinic doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I was like, well, surely those records have to exist somewhere. And then that's when she told me, like, no, those records can be destroyed by the time a person reaches 10 years old. And there's no law that says that they have to even be given over if they do exist. And I was like, wait, that seems completely insane. And then, basically every step of the way, as I started learning more about her story, I was like, wait, that doesn't seem like it can be true. And then as I did my journalistic due diligence, I was like, holy shit, it is true. How is this allowed?
I love yeah, how much of this unraveled just because you are a person that just started to think about it. Like you were questioning things in a totally logical way. Like you didn't, to me, it sounds like it for so long, so many people just like went with it.
Yeah.
And then because you're a journalist or because of your work in some capacity, you were like, wait a minute, I know just enough about these things to know that this is like red flags everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And then Amber, by that fall, late fall, like early November, she had connected with her biological father. His name is Kurt, and we interview him in the show. She and her half sister Caitlin. That's how Amber found out. She connected with Caitlin on 23andMe, and Caitlin had known all of her life that she was donor conceived. She's the child of a single mother by choice. And meanwhile, Amber had no clue at all.
That's such a great and teeny tiny case study right there.
Yeah, exactly. And like Amber was in a lot of denial initially. Like she's like, the only way that this girl can be related to me is that, my dad must have cheated on my mom. And not that Amber thought that was in her father's character, but she was like, that's the only logical explanation. And then, once she did confront her parents, they told her the truth, but only in the face of, DNA evidence. But then, yeah, Caitlin and Kurt, we kind of document how they then tracked down Kurt. He was open to talking with them, and he told Amber and Caitlin, he donated sperm 3 days a week for 3 years. And so conservatively, he's like, I probably have at least like 150 kids out there. And so when Amber told me that, I was like, that can't be true. I was like, that doesn't seem like a thing that can happen.
It's totally. And it's also now like, I've had enough time with the donor conceived community to know that 150 is a very generous estimate. So I also just appreciate Kurt's confidence that he's like, they were definitely using my sperm all the time. So that's sort of like, I feel sort of affection towards him for that. But he's not wrong about possibility for sure. And
right.
Probability. So yeah, 3 days a week for 3 years. That is 3 times 52 is 150 times 3 is 450 donations, roughly. It's a lot of sperm.
Yeah. And then, a lot of the clinics also take one sample and divide it into 2, sometimes into 3. So then, 450 times 3, I'm bad at math. That's why I work with words and talking to people. So I don't know what that number is, but it gets pretty high.
We're getting into like 1,400, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know either.
That's a really high number. But I just thought even the 150, I was like, that seems outrageous. And like, aren't there limits? Are like, how could this be possible? And so, yeah, as Amber learned more, she would tell me through our interviews, and then I would, do my journalistic due diligence of like try to verify this information, thinking that what she was saying, like, this can't be true, only to learn like, oh, it's very possible, probable, and like also how an entire industry has operated for decades. And that's when I was like, I almost fell over, where I was like, wow, this is a much bigger story than just like, my one friend who had this wild discovery. This is really about an entire sector of the American medical system operating with little to no oversight, and raking in millions of dollars in the process. And so that's one of the reasons why over 5 years I was like, no, I'm going to keep trying to get this published somewhere where it, hopefully can reach lots of people, because I was like, this seems just too wild.
Yeah, absolutely. What it sounds like lots of things were a surprise, but was there anything that was like your biggest surprise in this process?
Yeah, I would say, the fact that genetic testing is voluntary within, assisted reproductive technology, and also that most cryobanks tend to operate on the honor system, which I also found to be quite shocking, because I think a lot of us have probably gone, applied for a job and had to do a background check, like, things that you would assume are very basic, that they're, relying on the honor system. And, places like California Cryobank, for example, which is, still one of the largest cryobanks in the country, if not one of the largest in the world. They didn't start running even clinical psychological evaluations of donors until 2017, which is pretty recently.
That's the same year that Amber found out, by the way. That's like just the other day, 2017. Like that is wildly recent, wildly recent.
Yeah. Yeah. And, they don't do criminal background checks. Not to say that, people who have been convicted of something shouldn't be able to have, families or procreate. But, having that information might be helpful for parents who are seeking these, this donated material. And then also in terms of medical history, is that, again, it's operating on the honor system that you go in, you fill out, the form. You can go on to, I'll just use California Cryobank as another example. Again, you go onto their website right now, today, and like click on donor profiles. You can see their medical information, but it's literally just like an XXX. Have I had it? Had I not? And like, I was looking at one through the course of my reporting, and this was just like maybe 8 months ago. And like the person had checked like family history of cancer, but just like wrote in like colon cancer, breast cancer. And that was all the information that prospective parent would have received, not detailed reports or additional information, just like yes, it has existed in my family history.
Right. As if like, yeah. And even not even like, oh, it was one time, it was one person.
Yeah. Just like
and they had a great prognosis. It was just, or we've all had it. This is a big deal. Like nothing whatsoever.
Yeah. And so that was really surprising to me that like, and I think it obviously does a disservice to donor conceived people who need medical information to be able to, live full and healthy lives. But also, I think to prospective parents who are seeking out donated material, like they're being, it seems like a lot of smoke and mirrors. Like you're selling a parent who really wants to have a child. You're telling them this is safe, like we're doing our due diligence here, when really it's operating on the honor system. And even when people are forthcoming, there's not a lot of information even then. And I think, the cryobanks have a vested interest in making money and getting as many clients as possible. So why would they change their business practices? There's not a lot of incentive to do that when, it might scare away prospective donors to know that like every 5 years, you're going to have to mail in actual health records from your doctor's office. That like, when you're going through the initial screening process, that like we're going to interview your family members, like we're going to talk to them. That might scare people away from donating. And I think I can confidently say from my reporting, that is why the industry does not want to change.
Right.
Which is troubling because I think assisted reproductive technology is really expensive. So again, it's not just for the donor conceived people who I think have human right to know this information, but also their parents. It feels like they're kind of being duped a little bit.
Absolutely duped. I mean, and we know all sorts of, I'm sure you came across all the sorts of ways that the parents are duped, but with it either not really being the person they're told that is the donor, or it is the actual doctor who is the donor, or with no oversight and no background checks. It's interesting that they don't even, to me, it just seems like since, like, especially with the rise of all the other information that comes with DNA testing, like the history of diseases or genomic likelihood of things, that that they wouldn't just ask for your sperm and then ask for a DNA test. Mm-hmm. Like that feels like that would be way less, and that would, to me, conceptually feels less invasive than contacting every member of your family. Right. But they don't even do that.
Or sometimes they sometimes do that, but it comes at an additional cost. So it's an upsell in the way that you might go to a car dealership and, say, do you want the heated seats? Well, it's going to cost you $50 more or whatever.
So for the prospective parents, they have to pay more to get the DNA information.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is so effed up. It's so ridiculous.
Right. I mean, and it could
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it could be $500 more. It could be $1,000 more. And, again, going back to the fact that these treatments are expensive from the jump, obviously, we say, well, it's $500. What's the difference? But if you've tried, 4 rounds of IVF and already, shelled out $30,000, and this is your last sort of attempt to be able to potentially have a child, yeah, $500 or $1,000, especially a lot of people who they have to try multiple times, even with donated sperm or donated eggs.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And I look like everybody has different income levels and understandings of what is expensive and what is not. But every single person that I know in my personal life, podcast notwithstanding, that has used a donor, and most of them are same-sex couples, 0 of them have paid for the identifying information because it was more money. Right. And they're all in different, they're all in different income brackets, but every single one was like, oh no, it was this much more money. Like when the ones I have talked to in my life. Yeah. So I just think when you said hey, some people might say $500 is not a lot more. I think at that point, I think everybody thinks that's more. Yeah, everybody I know, everybody I know.
Yeah, same here. I've just heard from, from donor conceived people I've interviewed, which I understand their frustration of saying, well, people, parents should just pay for it. And yeah. I understand parents, they probably should just pay for it, but we unfortunately live in a capitalistic society. And then in the United States, obviously, reproductive treatment is not covered even in the most basic senses, let alone for assisted reproductive technology. Sorry.
Right. Well, also I think which is a theme of a conceptual problem throughout all of the way that donor conception or assisted reproduction works, is that all the people involved are adults thinking about themselves. And I'm not even criticizing or judging, but you're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the cells that will one day be a child, who will one day be an adult, who might want that information. You're just thinking this costs a lot. You're just thinking about yourself, your own bank account, your own process, your own journey, whether or not you need this information. I think, and I if anybody disagrees with me or thinks I'm way wrong about that, please let me know. I would love to have a conversation. But I think there's so much of this uproar lately has been because all these children are grown up and they're all saying hey, wait a second.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I definitely, in talking with donor conceived adults and Amber specifically, I remember in one interview, she said something to the effect of, everybody thinks about the baby they want, but nobody really thinks about the fact that that baby's going to grow up. And if you're a parent, you're going to wind up parenting an adult for more of your life than you will a child. And that adult is going to have wants and needs and want to know where they come from and what their medical history is and everything like that. And I think, I personally think the way that the industry operates, the way that cryobanks operate, they are trying to sell you to have a baby. And so so they market everything, online with the happy couples and little babies. They're not, I don't think they're adequately counseling even prospective parents on the implications of even the choices they're making with the clinic. And again, why would they, as it might impact their bottom line.
Right. It's actually kind of hilarious to imagine an advertising campaign for a donor conception, like a cryobank with adults with their grandparent age parents. We're so grateful that we've just done 35 years like this or whatever. Because guys, babies are so cute. Babies they sell stuff.
Totally
exactly. Sense. Do you know, and maybe it comes up in your podcast, but do you know, has a sort of rising tide of voices like what's happening right now, asking for all this information and pointing out all the irregularities or the injustices. Has that ever happened before? Is this the first time that the cryobanks are like facing this situation?
Yeah, it really is. And that's also one of the things that really drew me to this story is like, Amber, she was born in 1987, and a lot of the donor conceived adults I speak to also born in the 80s. And in the podcast, we do a deep dive into the history and how this technology started being used more widely. And it really was in the early to mid 80s where you see this boom in cryobanking. And like, it's really the first time in human history that this technology is starting to be used. And now, 30 plus years later, you know, the chickens come home to roost. Cryobanks, doctors, in prospective parents and donors in 1984 could not have foreseen the internet, could not have foreseen, I think the human genome wasn't even fully sequenced until the 90s, like DNA testing, commercial DNA testing. So I think that was very interesting to me that, yeah, we are seeing this new wave of donor conceived activism. And it's really only able to have taken shape because of commercial DNA testing that really started to take off around 2016. And I think us as a society, it's the first time we've had to really wrestle with these sort of difficult questions. Of course, that's, existed within the adoption community for a long time. I know donor conceived activists are really studying the adoptee rights movement to try to take a page from their strategy book. But even with the, early adoptee rights movement, they didn't have access to DNA testing. Now they do, obviously, like the rest of us do. But yeah, I think in the United States, we've had these conversations earlier about adoption, and we're just starting to have them with donated gametes and assisted reproduction.
It's so interesting because I was just thinking about how no one they've had no oversight. They've had no reason to keep track of people. They've had no reason to not charge extra money and it's like, I was just thinking about from the cryobank perspective of just like it ain't broke. like for them, like, wait, we just keep making more and more and more money. And if anyone within the industry was like, do you think maybe we should keep better track of anything? You can see why everyone would be like, no, the system is working. Right. Go, more and more. So that's why I was asking if like no one has ever presented this challenge to them, why would they change any part of what they do, right?
Yeah, that's their reasoning. Like I spoke with a couple times to Sean Tipton, who is the president of the chief public policy officer of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And I spoke to him about these issues. Like, this is what donor conceived adults want. What is the kind of industry's response? This is the main, medical society for assisted reproduction. And, he said to me, he's like, he first said, he's like, you don't need to know who your parents are. You don't need that information. That's not important. I'm like, I personally disagree, but interesting to hear you say that as somebody representing the industry.
I wish everyone could see my face right now.
Yeah. I know. My mouth was on the floor the first time I heard that.
He said that on the record?
Oh yeah, it's in episode 9.
Oh my god, you guys. Okay. Keep going. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay. And then, I asked him, well, like, these are the measures activists want to see. They want to see, limits on the number of people a donor can produce so somebody doesn't wind up with 150 siblings. They want to be able to access identifying information about the donor. They want access to medical records and many other things, right? And it really comes down to a record keeping system in addition to more testing. And Sean Tipton at the ASRM, flatly said, like, it's going to make it more expensive. So, we don't want to do it because it's going to make it a lot more expensive, and it's going to reduce the pool of potential donors if we have to hound them every couple of years for medical information. And so, yeah, they don't want to change because of the financial burden, they say.
Yeah. I love money. Everybody loves money. I get it. I get it. I get yeah, if only ethics and morality and humanity didn't get in the way of things.
Which, I mean, it's actually, as I've like thought about this issue, it's actually like ironic to me in a lot of ways that like, men who have sex with men, gay men, bi men, other people, men who have sex with men are not allowed to donate sperm in the United States. I think for many years they were not allowed to donate blood. I do believe that rule has been lifted, but I'm not 100% sure. But they're not allowed to donate sperm still in 2022. And it's ironic because that population would be a whole new group of donors that cryobanks could pursue. And then as it relates to the question of anonymity, those people might be also most open to contact, given that they might not have the ability to get a surrogate and have their own child. So be open to, having a connection to a biological child. And especially given that the vast numbers nowadays of people who use donated sperm are queer women. So they also might be more likely to being in contact with a donor if they know it's a member of the LGBTQ community. Yet the industry still is like, they're not advocating for the FDA to change its rules, whatever, because they even in their advertising, they're selling this like heterosexual couple dream on all their websites of like the happy nuclear family. And so I think there's lots that, in my opinion, that fits into that sort of dream family that the industry is also continuing to sell, that drives part of their policy.
So one thing that I like about your podcast and the way it's described is it talks about politics, and it's interesting to me because I like to talk about politics or I can't avoid politics. For me, that's just who I am. And I get a lot of criticism for that with this podcast. Like I get a lot of, not a lot, but people take the time to send me emails and make comments that they just wish I wouldn't be political and I could just like stick to the stories. And I just don't think that's possible. And, neither you or I have said anything about blue states or red states or Republicans or Democrats today, or progressive, or far right. Like we haven't said any of those words, but like, if you're listening, why this is political. Like you just described it so perfectly about how and why politics gets involved. And so it's just interesting to look at. I don't know. I don't have a, of course I have a direction I would like the world to go, but I don't, I'm not, I just want us to acknowledge it and talk about it, all the things that people aren't talking about.
I personally feel like family and reproduction in the United States are inherently political. There's no way around it. It comes to family, the ability, let's like start from the beginning, like whether or not you're doing, using donor sperm or donated eggs or embryos, like, maternal health care in this country is abhorrent. It's, significantly worse for Black women. It's also worse for other women of color, even among white women and white women in poor rural areas. Maternal health, there are maternal health deserts. So it's not just like a racial thing. Then childcare is incredibly expensive. Paid family leave, the ability to take time off of work and care for your child, the ability to earn a living wage to be able to support that child. Like, I often get annoyed when politicians, whatever, their political affiliation, like say like, oh, like women's issues are like family issues. Like they're issues for everyone who live in society. Right. If you are part of a family, it's an issue, and so I think in this country, who can have a family has been politicized for a long time. When you decide to have a child, if you don't want to have a child, like these issues are inherently political. And I think, people can disagree with me on this, but I think it's unavoidable as well not to acknowledge it, because you're missing a big slice of how, our society operates when you don't put these things into context of what they mean practically in a place where, laws are made about our bodies and who can reproduce. And that, to my earlier point, that includes men who, want to donate sperm, let's say. It's not just, about abortion or women and other people who can get pregnant and their ability to have a child or not have a child. It goes far beyond that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Standing ovation and a slow clap for me. That was really beautiful. Yeah, I don't want to make sweeping assumptions, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that everybody that has written me to talk or commented about my politics is probably a white person. It's just the ease of the I was going to say the ease of privilege, but that might be redundant. The privilege of privilege, right? The luxury to not think about politics. Maybe that
definitely a luxury.
Yeah, but if a person of color has complained, like by all means, like speak up. If I got you wrong,
I got the same. I got comments on our podcast and Apple Podcasts about being quote unquote too political, especially when, and I got it kind of from all sides when I raised the issue regarding regulation. We were talking about what the laws are and around donor conception and how they should change. And I said in the show, I try not to editorialize too much in the show, but I did hear that, whenever we talk about laws around reproduction, I get very nervous because I am somebody who believes in the right to choose. I am somebody that believes in good access to birth control and the ability to start your family when you want to start a family. And if you even do, the idea of assigning, rights to something that isn't yet born, to a sperm, to an egg, it's conflicting for me because I believe people like my friend Amber, yeah, she had a right before, when this process was happening, to be able to get that information. But at the same time, anti-choice folks are assigning special rights to the preborn. And so I think for donor conceived activists as well, this is going to have to be some kind of, slow balancing act here, because, if you are advocating for sperm, egg, and embryos to have certain rights, who's to say that idea can't then be abused to then say, yeah, I'm going to jump on this bandwagon and say, if you create an embryo in a lab, that's considered a person, and, which now we're hearing about as Roe v. Wade has been overturned, or, assigning personhood to, an embryo or a zygote, or even potentially beyond. So, that would be, and something I would encourage donor conceived activists to think about as they go on their journeys to lobby lawmakers, because I fully think that donor conceived people should have the right to, especially critical health information, and the ability to have a non-anonymous donor, and for people to be able to track down those biological relatives and form those connections. I think it's incredibly important. But it scares the shit out of me, the idea that it could be abused in 10, 15, or 30 years. We see, with this idea, 30 years ago, we didn't know any of this was going to happen with DNA testing. What's going to happen in another 30 years? So that's my maybe cynical New Yorker trepidation coming out. But yeah, somebody wrote on our reviews that I should be quiet about abortion and the potential effects that new laws could have.
Right. Look, it's an incredibly complex and nuanced conversation that can get hard emotionally, but it can also get overwhelming intellectually. And these are all things that not everybody wants to do, and maybe they're, perfectly capable of it, but they don't have the bandwidth right now. I'm not suggesting that anybody can't handle the intellectual level of talking about that nuance, but it's really, really complicated. And it, we all, I think everyone, at least in this country, I think everybody relates to some level of the emotional connection to political discussion. But unfortunately, depending on your perspective, I don't believe it can be avoided. if we're really
Yeah.
talking about this whole picture. We're trying to talk about this whole picture because the donor conceived or donor conception industry was not looking at the whole picture. So we're just asking everybody to expand the conversation, right?
Yeah.
At the
Mhm.
least, at the least. and then make changes, as appropriate. But what was your favorite part of this process?
Oh, what was my favorite part? I would say hearing from listeners about their own stories. I got a lot of emails from people being like, that is my exact story. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Like, this feels like this is exactly what's happening to me. And I think it felt good to me to be able to have people have their own stories reflected back at them. Especially like, my friend Amber, like I saw the real pain that she was in when she was going through this, and how she felt super alone when this was first happening. She didn't know anybody that was donor conceived. She barely had ever heard the term. She'd only like seen, heard about sperm donors on TV or in movies. And then like to have this happen to her, she said it was incredibly disorienting. And so it made me feel, I guess, happy that people were listening and connected with the material, and felt that they weren't so alone in what they were going through.
That makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. Just as someone who also is doing a podcast, that it's really about like connecting with people who understand the
Mm-hmm.
experience that really makes it feel so valuable or worth all the labor. Yeah. So moving forward, are you continuing the Biohacked project, or have you moved on to other things? What's going on for you now? What's next?
Yeah, so Biohacked is going to be a one season show. I think Sony has interest in kind of rebranding the feed and making it about their stories around family that don't have to do with DNA at all. Stories that yeah, that they still want to tell family stories, but I'm thankful that the show was successful enough that they're like, we think this is a vehicle to launch other kinds of content from the feed. So that makes me really happy. And then I'm sticking with Sony and developing new shows, hoping to be developing something right now. I'm doing some reporting legwork on the origins of the abortion pill in the United States. Has a fascinating history that I had no idea about. And hoping to bring that out sometime next year, but we shall see. I'm still trying to convince a couple of people to talk with me. And then I'm pitching and developing other stuff for Sony that has nothing to do with family or reproduction or politics. That is just sort of like cotton candy, really like silly kind of fun to listen to content that's like, about historic rivalries and drag queens and just completely totally different, which is good because I need a break sometimes from the heavy stuff.
Yeah, I was just thinking like you need balance. Speaking of balance, good that you've got like you've diversified your creativity in the podcast realm. That's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I love podcasting. I tell people I'm like I'm a nosy Puerto Rican girl from Long Island, so it's in my DNA to just talk to people and tell other people about it. Like that's what I was born and bred to do.
Never
just
thought
like
of it that way.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
just need to like it's essentially like gossiping, but like maybe a little bit more a little bit more shine on it. But yeah, I'm like that's my only skill is just like chatting and then telling other people about it.
I love it. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
That is so wonderful. Well, thank you so much for giving me your time. Do you feel like there's anything that I should have asked that you wanted to talk about? I didn't, give you a chance to segue into anything, or something you want listeners to know?
No, I mean, I would say if you haven't listened to Biohacked, please check us out. If you do like us, leave a rating and review because I want to drown out those negative ones. If you didn't like it, please don't leave a rating and review. Just kidding. And then I guess I'll recommend, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, so I'll recommend some books about this subject.
Yeah, definitely.
That informed my reporting. One is The Baby Business by Deborah Spar of Harvard University. And one is Test Tube Families, Why the Fertility Market Needs Legal Regulation by Professor Naomi Kahn. Both were extremely important reading for me. I'd also recommend Sex Cells, that's CELLS, by Renee Almeling at Yale University. So for whoever is interested in diving deep on donor conception, those are heavy but really interesting reads.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. We're always looking to bolster the library, just the reading library for the MPE community. It's so great. Well, thank you so much.
Good to talk with you.
Yeah, you too. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, I have such huge gratitude for TJ and her podcast, Biohacked. So go listen to it now, or wait just a few months and listen to it when I announce that we're going to have a podcast club party. I'm going to say that twice, with TJ. As you remember, I am wrapping up season 4 right now, but I definitely want to stay engaged with my listeners because you are why I do this in the first place. This community is so important to me. So I have finalized the dates for our next book club party with Krista Bilton. Her episode was last week. We're going to do October 2nd at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, just a couple hours on Zoom with everybody to talk about the book, talk about it with Krista. So if you haven't picked up a copy, do it now. That's going to be so fun. And then I want to change gears and do a podcast binge party. I'm calling it a podcast club party. So I actually have time to listen to Biohacked when the season wraps up. So let's do that just to change pace. And we'll do a Zoom party with TJ. So I suspect that we should wait till after the holidays to do this. October is getting pretty close after Krista's book. So it may be my first event of 2023, but I will keep you posted like I do. In the meantime, contact me if you want to be on the mailing list for book club party or podcast club party. I'm very excited. So also, that is not the only news I have today, my friends. Remember how I said, like a million times, that I'm wrapping up the podcast season and about to go on hiatus? And I've also said and mentioned that the impetus of this decision was that I was making huge mistakes. The hugest mistake I made was a few weeks ago. I had a wonderful interview. I felt like it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I forgot to record it. I forgot to hit record. And I had to contact these lovely people and tell them that I completely blew it. And I have been feeling so embarrassed, and I've been so hard on myself. I knew that it meant that I was doing too much and I needed a break. And then, y'all, I found the interview. I did not forget to record it. It had just saved itself to a very deep and dark random file in my computer. I have never been so relieved in my life. Therefore, all of that to say, this is not the last episode of the season, because I want to close out the season with this special Lost and Found episode next week. So next week will be my finale for season 4. Please join me. I'm so excited. I'm so happy. I'm so relieved. I'm still embarrassed. But in the meantime, if you want to support this project, there's all sorts of ways to do that. Follow along on all the socials. We are at Everything's Relative Podcast. If you want to see more, go to the website, everythingsrelativepodcast.com. That's also where you can buy a process journal or a t-shirt. All these different ways to be part of the community. Are we good? You good? I'm so happy to be back for one more episode next week. It's like my only chance to be an encore as a band. I'm the band, and it was the last song, but now I've come out for one more next week. So if you didn't leave the stadium to go get to your car yet, there's more to enjoy. Yay! And in the meantime, keep brushing your teeth. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Eve Sturgis. This is Everything's Relative. Bye-bye.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis is produced by Eve Sturgis and Kaylin Egan and edited by Joy Rumel. Logo designed by Ivy McNally, and music is used with permission from Goodbye the Band. Eve is a licensed psychotherapist, but her podcast episodes are not therapy sessions.